What if the most dangerous lies are made entirely of truth? It sounds impossible, but history shows us otherwise. Every authoritarian regime, every manipulative corporation, every political puppet master knows the same secret. You don't need to fabricate a lie if you can control which truths are told, and when. Imagine this: a news outlet presents a fact, completely accurate, verified, undeniable. But it's stripped of context, placed next to an unrelated image, or timed to coincide with a specific event. Suddenly, the truth becomes a weapon, sharpened to cut in only one direction. This isn't new. Propagandists in World War II didn't just invent rumors, they weaponized selective truths to stir outrage, justify invasions, and erase nuance. Today, the battlefield is your feed, your screen, your mind. Algorithms don't just show you information, they curate a worldview. And once you're trapped inside it, every fact reinforces the same story. The danger isn't ignorance anymore, the danger is false certainty, the uncheckable belief that you see reality clearly, when in fact, you're seeing a carefully engineered slice of it. In this video, we'll explore how truth becomes propaganda, why it works so effectively, and how epistemology gives us tools to fight back. Because knowing the truth is not enough, you have to know what's missing. Chapter 1: The Paradox of Truth. The first time I realized a fact could lie to me, it felt like my mind had stepped into a hall of mirrors. It was an ordinary afternoon. I was scrolling through headlines when one caught my attention. Crime rates double into years. No sensational adjectives, no anonymous sources. Just a cold, factual statement. I clicked. The numbers were from an official government database. Every figure checked out. And yet, days later, after stumbling on an independent analysis, I realized the truth I had consumed was nothing but a dressed-up distortion. Yes, the total number of reported crimes had doubled. But so had the size of the reporting population, new city boundaries, more residents, better reporting systems. Per capita, crime had actually gone down. The framing hadn't lied. But it had quietly led my mind to an inevitable, false conclusion. That's when it hit me. Truth can be the most dangerous form of deception. When someone lies outright, part of us braces for impact. We question, we probe, we verify. But when we're handed a fact, we exhale. We assume the work is done, no further suspicion required. And that is precisely why truth is so powerful in the hands of those who know how to wield it. History is full of such examples. A Roman senator, eager to consolidate power, could step before the Senate and truthfully announce a grain crisis, omitting that the shortages were temporary or the result of his own allies' maneuvering. The statement was factual, but the emotional reaction it stirred was orchestrated. In the lead-up to the Spanish-American War, U.S. newspapers truthfully reported the sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. The fact was real, the ship had exploded, but the insinuation, never outright stated, that Spain was responsible became the emotional engine for war. Years later, evidence suggested the explosion might have been accidental. By then, the damage was irreversible. In modern times, the sophistication has only grown. Economic data can be presented to highlight one quarter's losses without mentioning the record growth in the following months. Crime statistics can be pulled from selectively violent districts while ignoring safer regions. Medical studies can be summarized by cherry-picking outcome groups that support a sponsor's preferred conclusion. Epistemology teaches us that facts are like bricks, sturdy, solid, unchanging. But bricks alone don't make a house. Someone decides which bricks to choose, where to place them, and which walls to leave unfinished, and in that arrangement lies power. The paradox of truth is this: a fact's validity does not guarantee its honesty. A true statement can be weaponized to frame reality in a way that manipulates belief, inflames fear, or manufactures consent. Once you understand this, you begin to see the invisible architecture around you, the careful curation of reality. And you realize that the question isn't simply "is this true?" but what truth has been left out. Because the most dangerous truths are not the ones we hear. They are the ones we never realize we're missing. Chapter 2: History's Selective Truth-Tellers. Every age has its truth-tellers, and every age has those who know that telling part of the truth can be far more effective than telling the whole. In ancient Rome, the Senate was a theater of precision rhetoric. Senators did not need to fabricate wild lies to sway the crowd. They simply had to arrange their truths artfully. Picture a statesman standing before the assembly in the forum. The grain reserves have fallen by half since last season. The statement was accurate. The numbers came from the state's own storage ledgers. But what the speaker didn't mention, and what most citizens wouldn't know, was that the decline was temporary, caused by a planned export deal that would replenish reserves within months. Left without that context, citizens heard shortage and felt the pulse of fear. That fear could then be redirected toward political enemies, toward demands for emergency powers, toward loyalty oaths to protect Rome. Centuries later, during the Reformation, religious authorities learned the same craft. In cities like Geneva and Rome, public sermons would include exact quotations from Scripture, but with key verses omitted or read out of sequence, subtly shifting the theological meaning. By quoting faithfully yet selectively, leaders could frame divine authority as fully backing their policies, even when the broader text suggested a far more nuanced message. The 19th and early 20th centuries brought a new theater for selective truth: mass media. During the lead-up to the Spanish-American War, the American press famously reported the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. The fact was undeniable: the ship had been destroyed. Photographs of the wreck were real. Survivor testimonies were real. But headlines and illustrations were paired with speculative commentary: "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," implying, without stating outright, that Spain was responsible. Later investigations suggested the cause may have been an internal accident. By then, war fever had already gripped the public. In Nazi Germany, Joseph Goebbels perfected the tactic. He often used real statistics, quoting the unemployment figures of the Weimar Republic, but leaving out the broader economic context or the ways those figures fluctuated. By selectively presenting true data, he could craft a narrative of chaos that only National Socialism could solve. Even democratic nations have played the same game. During the Vietnam War, American officials often reported accurate body counts of enemy combatants, but without noting the questionable methods of counting, sometimes including civilians or counting the same bodies twice. The numbers were technically correct but strategically stripped of meaning, transformed into a weapon to maintain domestic support for a failing war. The lesson is sobering. Truth alone does not safeguard against manipulation. A fact can be precise yet misleading, honest yet destructive. What matters is the selection: what's shown, what's hidden, and what's timed for maximum effect. And the most skilled manipulators of history knew that a carefully chosen truth could outlive any outright lie, because it carries the authority of evidence while planting the seed of a distorted reality. Chapter 3: The Psychology of Truth Manipulation. If facts are bricks, psychology is the mortar. You can't build a lasting narrative without understanding how human minds cling to certain truths and discard others. Those who weaponize truth don't just rely on statistics and documents, they rely on our predictable patterns of thinking. 1. Confirmation bias, the comfort of agreement. Your brain loves to be right. It's not just a preference, it's chemical. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that when we encounter information confirming our beliefs, the brain's reward centers light up. We feel validated, intelligent, and secure. This means that if someone feeds you a fact that aligns with your worldview, you'll not only accept it, you'll defend it fiercely, even if it's irrelevant or incomplete. For example, a political supporter might share a verified statistic about unemployment improving under their favorite leader, without mentioning that the trend began under the previous administration. The omission isn't questioned because the fact already feels true enough emotionally. Weaponizers of truth know this. The easiest fact to sell is the one you already want to believe. 2. The framing effect, how the same truth feels different. The framing effect is the psychological trick of presenting identical information in different ways to produce different emotional reactions. Imagine two headlines reporting the same medical study: 90% survival rate after surgery, 10% mortality rate after surgery. Both statements are accurate. Yet studies consistently show that people feel far more reassured by the first and far more anxious about the second, even though they mean the same thing. In politics, war, and commerce, framing turns raw truth into emotional impact. A government could truthfully say, tax rates will increase by 3%, or we're investing in infrastructure with just a small tax adjustment. The difference is not in the facts, it's in the way the truth is framed. 3. The availability heuristic. What's seen feels true. Your brain doesn't just rely on data, it relies on accessibility. The more easily a fact comes to mind, the more important you think it is. If news media reports on airline crashes every night, you might believe flying is increasingly dangerous, even if statistical truth says it's safer than ever. The facts you don't see, like the millions of safe flights, are invisible in your mental calculation. Truth manipulators exploit this by flooding your attention with certain facts while keeping others hidden in obscurity. If you see crime reports daily, even if crime rates are historically low, your emotional perception will insist that danger is everywhere. 4. Emotional pairing. Why truth sticks when it hurts. Neuroscience tells us that emotion is the glue of memory. When a fact is paired with a strong emotional trigger, fear, pride, outrage, it embeds itself deeply in your recall. This is why political campaigns so often pair real statistics with images of suffering children, war footage, or natural disasters. The fact gains permanence, not because of its intellectual merit, but because of the emotional charge that accompanies it. In the hands of a skilled manipulator, these biases are not bugs of the human mind, they are features, reliable levers that can be pulled again and again. The person who controls the delivery of truth doesn't have to twist reality. They just have to feed it to you in the right shape, at the right moment, with the right emotional hook. In the next chapter, we'll step into the digital battlefield, where algorithms have become the newest, most efficient weaponizers of truth, curating your reality without you even noticing. Chapter 4: The Algorithmic Amplifier. In the ancient world, truth was weaponized in public forums, pulpits, and newspapers. In our world, it's weaponized in something far more personal: your feed. When you open your phone in the morning, you're not stepping into a neutral marketplace of ideas. You're stepping into a curated theater where every fact, every headline, every statistic is chosen not for accuracy, but for its ability to keep you engaged. And engagement is not the same as enlightenment. 1. The personalization trap. Algorithms don't just recommend content, they study you. They log how long you linger on a post, which headlines you click, which videos you watch to the end. Every like, share, and pause is a breadcrumb that reveals your preferences, your biases, your fears. Once the system knows you, it doesn't give you the whole truth. It gives you the sticky truth, the kind of information that keeps your eyes on the screen. That usually means facts that agree with your worldview or trigger emotions that glue you to your device. Over time, this creates an epistemic prison, a reality tailored to you, where contradictory truths are quietly hidden away because they might cause you to scroll past instead of clicking. 2. The illusion of omniscience. One of the most dangerous side effects of algorithmic truth delivery is the illusion that you're well informed. Because you're constantly being fed facts, articles, charts, breaking news banners, you feel like you're seeing the big picture. But personalization means you're actually seeing a slice of reality, carefully selected to keep you comfortable or agitated, depending on what drives your engagement. You're like someone in Plato's cave, except the shadows are customized just for you. 3. Amplification and suppression. The real power of modern algorithms isn't just in what they show you, it's in what they bury. A video debunking a popular conspiracy theory might technically exist online, but if it's shown to only a fraction of the people who believe the conspiracy, it's functionally invisible. Meanwhile, content that triggers outrage, even if it's entirely factual, gets pushed to millions because outrage is engagement gold. The fact may be true, but its strategic amplification distorts your perception of how widespread, urgent, or important it is. 4. From propaganda to personalized psychological warfare. Traditional propaganda was a broadcast, one message for everyone. Algorithmic propaganda is a sniper rifle, a different fact for each person, tailored to your psychological profile. During the 2016 US election, the Cambridge Analytica scandal revealed how political operatives could target individuals with different factual narratives based on their personality traits. Anxious users might get facts that highlighted chaos and instability. People with high narcissism scores might get facts that flattered their intellect or morality. Each fact was real, but each was aimed like a bullet at the weak spots of the human mind. In the pre-digital world, truth weaponization had to be blunt, broadcast, and broad. In the algorithmic age, it's invisible, intimate, and precise. And the most unsettling part: It doesn't just shape what you believe, it shapes what you never think to question. In the next chapter, we'll look at case studies of modern truth manipulation in action, moments where a fact was used not to inform, but to control. Chapter 5: Case Studies in Modern Truth Weaponization. Theory becomes terrifying when you see it unfold in real time. These case studies show how, in the modern era, facts have been wielded with surgical precision, not to enlighten, but to engineer consent, fear, or loyalty. Case Study 1: The Economic Crisis That Wasn't. In 2011, a headline swept through European media. National debt has reached 90% of GDP. Economic collapse looms. The figure was accurate, pulled from a widely cited academic study by Reinhardt and Rogoff. Governments invoked the number to justify harsh austerity measures. Citizens braced for disaster. But months later, graduate students at the University of Massachusetts Amherst discovered something extraordinary. The original study had a spreadsheet error. When corrected, the relationship between debt and economic collapse nearly disappeared. 40 years, a technically true number, cherry-picked and amplified, had been enough to change policy across entire nations. By the time the correction emerged, jobs were lost, services cut, and economies contracted. Case Study 2: The Surge in Crime. In 2020, several cities reported that violent crime had increased by 20% compared to the previous year. The statistic was factual, but national news outlets presented it without context. Violent crime had been at a historic low for decades, and even after the increase, it was still lower than in most years of the 1990s. By stripping away that historical frame, the fact became a weapon for fear. Politicians leveraged it to argue for harsher policing laws, more funding for surveillance, and the rollback of criminal justice reforms. Case Study 3: The War Justification. Before the 2003 invasion of Iraq, U.S. officials repeatedly stated that Saddam Hussein had purchased aluminum tubes suitable for uranium enrichment. This was true, the tubes could be used in nuclear centrifuges. But what was left unsaid was that they were far more likely to be used for conventional rockets, a fact known to many experts at the time. By highlighting one plausible use while ignoring the likelier one, leaders turned a technical truth into a persuasive emotional rallying point for war. Case Study 4: The Climate Pause. In 2013, climate change skeptics seized on a real data point. From 1998 to 2012, the rate of global surface temperature increase slowed compared to the previous decades. Headlines proclaimed a pause in global warming. What the headlines omitted: 1998 had been an unusually hot year due to a massive El Niño, skewing the short-term trend. And when looking at ocean heat content, a more reliable long-term indicator, warming hadn't slowed at all. The pause narrative persisted for years, weakening public support for urgent climate action. Case Study 5: The Pandemic Numbers. During the COVID-19 pandemic, some outlets highlighted the survival rate for infected individuals, over 99% for many age groups. This was technically correct, but without context about transmission rates, long-term health effects, and healthcare system strain, it created a false sense of security. The number was real, but its strategic presentation downplayed the collective risk. These examples share the same DNA: each fact was accurate, each number verifiable, yet each was wielded with a framing that served a larger agenda. In the next chapter, we'll move from how facts are selected to how they're staged, the theatrical techniques that make truth irresistible and unforgettable. Chapter 6: The Theater of Truth. Facts alone are rarely enough to move masses. What truly gives them power is presentation, the staging, the delivery, the performance. The weaponization of truth is as much an art form as it is a science. From the Roman Forum to the modern news studio, those who control the narrative understand that a fact doesn't just need to be correct. It needs to be performed in a way that makes it unforgettable. 1. The dramatic pause. A skilled speaker knows when to let silence do the work. Dropping a statistic in a speech, then pausing for the weight of it to sink in, turns a number into a moment. It gives the audience time to feel the fact, not just hear it. During the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy revealed photographic evidence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. The images were accompanied by deliberate, unhurried commentary. The slow pacing gave the impression of grave certainty, even though the actual intelligence assessments were still incomplete. 2. Visual anchoring. Humans are visual creatures. A number on a page is abstract, but attach that number to an image, a starving child, a burning oil field, a crumbling bridge, and it becomes emotionally anchored in memory. Modern news broadcasts use this constantly, overlaying unemployment statistics on footage of empty factories, or pairing climate data with imagery of catastrophic floods. The fact becomes inseparable from the emotional tone of the image, even if the two are not directly related. 3. The expert seal. The inclusion of an authoritative figure, a general, a scientist, a decorated official, gives facts a veneer of unassailable credibility. The audience is less likely to scrutinize the claim because it is paired with institutional authority. This is why, during wartime, governments often stage press conferences flanked by uniformed officers. The uniforms are not just decoration, they are symbols that silently affirm the legitimacy of the truth being presented. 4. Repetition as ritual. Repetition doesn't just increase familiarity. It builds a ritual around the truth. Phrases like weapons of mass destruction or flatten the curve are repeated until they become reflexive thought patterns. Each repetition cements the association between the words and the intended emotional response. Joseph Goebbels understood this better than most. A lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. The same applies to weaponized facts. Repetition turns them into unquestioned pillars of belief. 5. The urgency frame. Urgency transforms facts from background information into immediate action points. Headlines that begin with "breaking" or "officials warn" can take a static truth and inject it with adrenaline. Even when the underlying fact isn't time-sensitive, urgency framing convinces people they must react now, before it's too late to think critically. Theatrical truth is not about falsifying reality. It's about designing the experience of reality. By controlling not just what is said, but how it's said, manipulators bypass analysis and go straight to emotion. In the next chapter, we'll examine why weaponized truth is so hard to challenge, the psychological and social barriers that make countering it feel almost impossible. Chapter 7. Why it's so hard to fight back. When a fact has been weaponized, it's not enough to simply show a counterfact. The resistance you meet isn't just intellectual, it's emotional, social, and sometimes even physical. Challenging weaponized truth means pushing against the way human minds and societies are wired. 1. The backfire effect. Psychologists have found that when people are confronted with evidence that contradicts their beliefs, they often double down rather than reconsider. This is known as the backfire effect. If someone has emotionally invested in a fact, even if it's incomplete or misleading, attacking that fact feels like attacking their identity. You're not just questioning their information, you're questioning them. This is why attempts to fact-check often fail. Instead of persuading, they can reinforce the original belief, because the brain treats the contradiction as a threat to selfhood. 2. Social cost of doubt. In many communities, holding the wrong opinion comes with penalties, social ostracism, career setbacks, loss of trust. If your friends, family, or colleagues all treat a certain fact as sacred, you risk isolation by questioning it. This creates an environment where people may privately suspect that a widely shared fact is being misused, but they will publicly repeat it anyway to avoid friction. Over time, this silence helps the weaponized fact maintain its grip. 3. The emotional anchoring problem. Once a fact is emotionally anchored, tied to a fear, hope, pride, or trauma, it becomes impervious to purely rational argument. Emotional memory is stored differently than factual memory. It's more vivid, more enduring, and harder to overwrite. Think of someone who has lost a loved one in a high-profile crime. Even if statistics show that crime rates are falling, the emotional memory of their loss will make that fact almost irrelevant to their perception of safety. 4. Cognitive overload and fatigue. Weaponized facts often thrive in chaotic information environments. When we're bombarded with conflicting claims, our brains reach for simplicity. The easiest path is to cling to whatever fact feels familiar or easy to remember, even if it's misleading. This is why disinformation campaigns rarely try to replace every fact. They just create enough noise that people settle for the comforting clarity of a simple, emotionally satisfying truth. 5. Trust infrastructure. Even when someone sees through a weaponized fact, they need a trusted source to replace it with. But in an era where trust in institutions, media, and experts is eroding, that replacement is hard to find. Without a credible alternative, people may stick with the flawed fact simply because it's attached to a familiar messenger. The difficulty in fighting weaponized truth isn't a flaw of intelligence, it's a feature of human psychology. Those who exploit it don't need to invent lies. They just need to plant truths in fertile emotional soil and let them grow. In the next chapter, we'll explore the ethical dilemma. When, if ever, is it acceptable to weaponize the truth for a good cause? Chapter 8, The Ethical Dilemma of Truth Weaponization. It's tempting to imagine that truth weaponization is always wrong, but what happens when the cause is just? Can the same psychological levers used to control people be used to protect them? This is where epistemology collides with moral philosophy and where the answers get uncomfortably blurry. 1. The noble lie. Plato himself entertained the idea of the noble lie, a carefully crafted falsehood told by leaders to maintain social harmony. In modern times, we see its cousin, the strategic truth. This is when a fact is selectively framed, not to deceive maliciously, but to guide people toward what's believed to be a better outcome. For example, during a public health crisis, officials might emphasize the most alarming but accurate statistics to push people toward precautionary behaviors, even if the fuller context would reveal the risk is lower for certain groups. 2. The battlefield argument. Military leaders have long understood that information is a weapon. In wartime, truth is often released or withheld to maintain morale, mislead the enemy, or rally allies. When survival is on the line, the moral cost of manipulating truth is often considered acceptable. The problem is that once the war ends, the habit of controlling information can persist, bleeding into peacetime governance. 3. The paternalism problem. When authorities decide to weaponize truth for the greater good, they implicitly claim a position of epistemic superiority. We know better than you what you need to hear. Even when the outcome is beneficial, this raises troubling questions about autonomy. If citizens only make decisions based on curated truths, are they truly free? Or are they participants in a benevolent illusion? 4. The slippery slope. One of the greatest dangers in weaponizing truth for good is the slow erosion of ethical boundaries. A government that initially manipulates facts to save lives in a pandemic might later use the same methods to suppress dissent or distract from corruption. History is littered with examples where temporary emergency measures became permanent fixtures of power. 5. The transparency paradox. Absolute transparency sounds noble, but it can paralyze decision-making and so panic. Complete openness about every detail, from military strategy to financial instability, can cause more harm than selective disclosure. This creates a paradox. Sometimes, to maintain stability, leaders may need to choose which facts to emphasize. But every choice is an act of framing, and every act of framing is a potential weaponization. The ethical dilemma boils down to this: can you manipulate without corrupting? Can you weaponize truth without eventually becoming the very manipulator you feared? In the next chapter, we'll shift from the ethical to the strategic, how individuals can build immunity to truth weaponization without withdrawing from public life entirely. Chapter 9, Building Immunity to Truth Weaponization. If facts can be turned into tools of manipulation, then protecting yourself requires more than skepticism. You need cognitive armor, habits of mind, and strategies of engagement that allow you to interact with information without becoming its prisoner. 1. Practice source triangulation. Never accept a fact from a single outlet, even if it's one you generally trust. Compare it with how it's presented by different sources, ideally across political, cultural, or national boundaries. Weaponized facts often rely on narrow framing. Seeing the same data through multiple lenses helps you notice what's been omitted or overemphasized. 2. Separate the fact from the frame. When you encounter a striking claim, crime is skyrocketing, the economy is collapsing, ask the questions. What is the raw data? How is it being presented to me? Often, the fact itself is neutral. The framing is what gives it emotional charge. Learn to strip the frame away before reacting. 3. Train your emotional awareness. Weaponized truth thrives on bypassing rational analysis and triggering feelings. Notice your first emotional reaction to a fact: fear, anger, pride, outrage. Then pause. That emotion is the hook. Once you see it, you're harder to reel in. 4. Use the reverse headline test. Flip the statement and see if it still sounds plausible. If you read X policy saved 10,000 lives, try reframing, X policy failed to save 5,000 lives. Both could be true, but the emotional spin changes. This helps you detect how much of the impact is in the packaging. 5. Guard against cognitive overload. Too much information can push you toward simple, comforting narratives, the perfect environment for weaponized truth to take root. Curate your intake. Choose quality over quantity. It's not disengagement, it's self-defense. 6. Build communities of inquiry. Isolation makes you easier to manipulate. Engage with people who are willing to challenge each other constructively, even if they disagree. A healthy information diet requires exposure to multiple interpretations, but in an environment of trust, not hostility. 7. Learn the tells of manipulation. Certain patterns should trigger alertness. Overuse of emotionally charged visuals, one-sided expert panels, statistics without timeframes or baselines, claims that demand immediate action without room for debate. These are not proof of manipulation, but they are risk factors. Building immunity is not about rejecting all facts, it's about reclaiming your ability to meet them on your own terms. Truth can be a weapon, but it can also be a shield if you hold it, instead of letting it hold you. In the next and final chapter, we'll explore what it means to live in a world where truth will always be contested, and why that's not necessarily a tragedy. Chapter 10. Living in a contested truth world. If the last 9 chapters have taught us anything, it's this: truth will never be a final, fixed object we can put in a glass case and label settled forever. It is always alive, always fought over, always contested. And this is not just a flaw in the human condition, it is also a sign of vitality. 1. The illusion of the final word. There is a dangerous longing in human psychology for closure, for the final, authoritative statement that ends the debate. But history shows that even our most proven truths eventually shift when new evidence, perspectives, or contexts emerge. The idea that truth is static makes us vulnerable. It leads us to cling to old facts long after they've expired, simply because they once felt solid. Accepting that truth evolves forces us to stay alert, adaptive, and humble. 2. The advantage of the disputed. A world where truths are contested may feel unstable, but it's also one of the best defenses against absolute tyranny. When no one's version of reality can dominate unopposed, it creates space for alternative voices, for revision, for correction. The danger is not that truths are debated, the danger is when they can't be debated. The silencing of dissent is the true signal that truth has been captured by power. 3. Truth as a commons. Think of truth as a shared public space, messy, noisy, and full of conflict. It will never be perfectly clean, but it is strengthened by the friction of many perspectives. The moment we abandon it to a single authority, it starts to decay. Maintaining this commons requires effort, fact-checking, source diversity, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable realities even when they contradict our team, tribe, or ideology. 4. The personal compact. Living in a contested truth world requires a personal code. I will test the facts I'm given. I will remain open to being wrong. I will value curiosity over certainty. I will seek understanding before victory. This doesn't mean giving equal weight to falsehoods, but it does mean resisting the comfort of unexamined agreement. 5. The paradox of freedom. The very chaos that makes truth so exhausting is also what makes freedom possible. A citizenry that navigates contested truths, however imperfectly, is harder to rule by manipulation than one that craves only easy, comforting narratives. Weaponized truth is a reality we will never fully escape. But by recognizing its existence, understanding its mechanics, and refusing to surrender our agency, we can live in the tension without being consumed by it. The world will never give us a perfect truth, but it will always give us the choice to think, to question, and to decide, even when the facts themselves are fighting for control.